Tonight on Greater Boston, we're coming to you from the Boston Public Library with Charlie Baker on his way out. Most political observers say it's very likely Massachusetts will be joining most of the rest of the country as a single-party state, with the same party in charge of the legislature and the governor's office. So what do we stand to lose when we lose partisan competition, when we lose checks and balances? Then later, possibly a partial answer to that question, possibly not, by way of recent history. I'm joined by the director and reporter behind the new FRONTLINE documentary, Plot to Overturn the Election. Competition is at the heart of American democracy. Two or more parties are supposed to go head-to-head before the public to hold each other accountable. But over the past few decades, that respectful exchange of ideas has been harder to come by, exacerbated by the likes of Donald Trump, who's not only stoked partisan animosity, but notoriously embraced an entirely different set of so-called alternative facts for his supporters. Thanks to that Trumpification of the GOP, the strong rise of progressive movements, a whole lot of gerrymandering, and a few other factors, the two major U.S. parties are moving further from the center every minute, and partisan balance back in the states is disappearing. That includes here in Massachusetts, one of only 12 states where one party controls the legislature and the other the corner office. I'll do the math for you. That means in the other 38, there's one party in control of all of it. And as Kara Vogt writes this week in The Atlantic, the decision by Charlie Baker, one of America's most popular governors and a moderate, not to run for re-election in a heavily Democratic state, quote, is a dark omen for the future of America's two-party system. Joining me to discuss are Jennifer Nassour, former chair of the Massachusetts Republican Party and founder and president of the Pocketbook Project, and Steve Kerrigan, former CEO of the Democratic National Convention and president of Barack Obama's inaugural committee. Long time. It's great to see you both. Thanks for being here.
Of course, nice to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Jennifer, the thesis of this piece in The Atlantic is that Trumpers in the Republican Party in Massachusetts drove Charlie Baker out of the governorship, at least drove his decision not to run. Your face suggests you don't buy it.
No, I don't buy it at all. Listen, Charlie Baker has been governor for 7 years now. And at some point, it's time to, go on, move on and do something else. He started with Snowmageddon, where we had snowstorms almost every single day. And he's ending now in his time as being governor through a pandemic, a worldwide pandemic that has taken Massachusetts 2 years to move out of. So I would say at this point, he's probably exhausted. His family is exhausted, and he's still young enough to go on and have another chapter in his career.
But Jennifer, even if everything you say is true, what's also true is in a poll at the end of last year, 3/4 of Republicans in your party in Massachusetts said they were loyal to Trump. 68% of Republicans in this state said that Joe Biden was not the legitimate president of the United States. Could Charlie Baker have even won a primary in that party?
Absolutely. Charlie Baker would not only win a primary, but he would win the governor's office again. So, look, a poll is a poll, and who's answering those polls? Because I don't know about you, but I don't have enough time to answer those polls. I don't know if Steve has enough time to answer those. He does.
Steve does. He has plenty of time.
He has plenty of time. I think what we see with polls is that, they're good for those who answer them. But for everyone else, when you look at Baker's record, and when you look at not only Baker's record, but if you look at the record of all of the Republican governors that have served in Massachusetts, they have all been amazing fiscal managers. We have had the economy on track and businesses going.
Fair enough. Steve, I got to go to Steve. Are you buying this notion that Charlie Baker, I happen to agree with Jennifer, I should say, but the numbers suggest that he couldn't have won a primary. Could he?
Yeah, I tend to, as much as it pains me, I at least tend to agree with part of what Jen said.
What part?
Which is, I think he probably could have won his primary. It would have been a lot harder. They're in such disarray over at the state Republican Party that who knows what could have happened there with their state convention and all that. But I think he would have been able to find a way to eke out the nomination. I do not think if Maura Healey had been on the ballot against him, that it would have been a lead pipe cinch that he'd get a third term. But it would have been a fun campaign to watch.
Well, but I think the reality, Steve, staying with you, is the polls suggest, and I think reality suggests, may change by the fall, is that with Baker out of the race, it's much more likely that this does become a one-party state, like suggested in the Atlantic. It would be a one-party Democratic state. Does that trouble you at all in terms of small d democracy? Not the capital D, but small d, Steve?
No, because I think, look, regardless of your party, the governor has a responsibility to sell their agenda to the people of the Commonwealth and to the legislature. And there's always been a healthy tension between the governor's office and the legislature, regardless of the party of either. And, we saw it during Deval Patrick's administration. There was constantly, they were at loggerheads, but they got a lot of really great things done. It happened during Dukakis. I mean, Dukakis was primaried by a Democrat and lost the office and came back. I mean, so there's always that tension. This is really about leadership and not partisanship.
But Steve, there were 3 felonious Democratic speakers in a row. And my thesis is that wouldn't have happened had there been more balance in state government, whether within the legislature itself. Is that not a fair conclusion to reach?
So, look, I have said many times, and to the consternation of many of my Democratic friends, that probably the best thing for little d democracy and the big D Democratic Party would be a stronger Republican Party in Massachusetts. But right now, they can't seem to get out of their own way, whether they're supporting Donald Trump and by the way, like handcuffing their own party from any progress in organizing because of that fealty to that wannabe autocrat that was Donald Trump. So it's I wish there was a stronger debate, and Jen and I have these conversations all the time. Like, it would be wonderful if there were more people who were willing to talk about how we can move the Commonwealth forward, but it just doesn't exist right now. And in the vacuum of that, and if a Democrat wins in November, God willing, then we're going to have that discussion about what the future of the Commonwealth lays, but it'll be up to the governor to sell their agenda. History does not show our legislature willing to step aside or abdicate any of that responsibility. They're
Jen,
going to step up.
how much do you worry about one party? Not how much do you worry, how much should voters worry, if at all, about one-party rule in Massachusetts? Steve's right about Deval Patrick's governorship. It wasn't a walkover for him and this legislature. In some ways, I got the sense they resented the fact that the spotlight was redirected to the Democratic governor and away from the Speaker and the Senate President. So how much concern would you have about an all-Democratic governing body in Massachusetts?
I have a lot of concern about it because, going back to your point of small d democracy, the most important thing, I think, for all of us should be democracy, making sure that we have a balance of power, making sure that the best people are elected to office. Now, I don't agree that mass Republicans are in disarray. The Massachusetts Republican Party, I have a lot of things to say, but I can't say them on air because they're not appropriate. What I will say is that we need to separate that apparatus from the actual voters. And I also would like to point out that 57% of voters in Massachusetts actually consider themselves unenrolled. So if those voters actually wanted to have themselves vote all the time for Democrats, if they wanted Democrats in office all the time, they would be Democrats, because clearly that's, where the cool kids are.
Right? Jen, if I may, just one second. Jen, when you say the Republican Party itself, the members are not in disarray, the reason they're not in disarray is because there aren't any members of the Republican Party. I mean, let me run some statistics by you. 10% of registered voters, 10% are Republicans. Only 31 out of 200 seats in the legislature held by Republicans. And the guy who's the chair of the Republican Party doesn't condemn homophobia, endorses an anti-Asian candidate, has a financial, I don't mean personal, but organizational financial problems, and trashes the most popular Republican governor in America. So the future of Republicans intra-state is miserable, is it not?
No, because I don't think that, because I think if you look at the candidates that we do have out right now, if you look at Anthony Amore, who's running for auditor, he is very strong, very smart, and he is very professional. If you look at Chris Doughty, who's running for governor, forget about the other people and the other things that are being said. Again, businessman, really smart fiscal acumen. I think that that's what Massachusetts really wants and likes. That's what
Before I
our voters
get to
like.
Steve, you mentioned Doty, and you didn't mention Jeff Deal, who obviously is at the moment the leading Republican candidate who chaired Trump's campaign. And I don't know if he's for Trump or against. I don't know where he is now. Here's Doty with Adam Riley on Talking Politics. Listen to what he had to say.
I don't remember saying that I was a moderate. I would describe myself as my own man. I don't come from a skyscraper in Boston. I come from a manufacturing background. I've been working with working families my whole life. And I have my own views and my own perspectives in life. So I would say that I'm a Chris Doty Republican.
Don't call me a moderate, he says, when the only Republicans that get elected to anything statewide in Massachusetts run as moderates. He's scared of the Trump wing of your party too, no?
I don't think anyone should be scared of the Trump wing of the party. And I don't think that's it. I think that it's, first time candidate jitters, getting on TV and kind of stumbling over what you're saying. And I feel like there always look, we know that there are always those little gotcha times. And that was one of those times.
Can we talk? I got to get the guy who's laughing into this. Why are you laughing, Steve Kerrigan?
I don't know how that question is a gotcha question, but I would go back to your premise, Jim, that the only Republicans of late to get elected in my lifetime in Massachusetts for governor have been moderate Republicans. They have terrified Chris because he's got to get through their convention process. He's got to get through their primary. And they've terrified him that if he identifies as a moderate, that he's going to lose. I mean, the fact is the Republican Party, regardless of which one of these two gentlemen become the nominee, the Republican Party is going to do everything they can to hold on to this. And they will throw a dirty rag and dirty accusation against whoever the Democratic nominee is. They outspent us 11-1 in 2014 in the last 8 weeks with outside money from outside of Massachusetts. So they'll do anything and say anything to get elected. The most honest thing Chris Doty could have said was that he was a moderate and that he was a Charlie Baker Republican. And by the way, he would have picked up some of that 50-something% of unenrolled voters should he get past their primary, but he was nervous about doing that, and that's exactly why he said what he said.
Jen, I want to spend a minute. We talked about the dismal state of affairs, at least my analysis of where the Republicans are in the state. It's not just here. We have John Sununu. I wouldn't call him a moderate, but a very popular Republican governor in New Hampshire, says I'm not running for the Senate, essentially because I don't want to be part of that lunacy. You have Phil Scott, the Republican governor of Vermont, I would argue had a pretty decent shot at the seat of Patrick Leahy. He's not running. And look at these stunning numbers that were published in Politico, the Massachusetts playbook today. This is amazing. Massachusetts-based contributions to New Hampshire GOP congressional candidates, $317,000. To Massachusetts GOP congressional candidates, a third that much, $128,000. By the way, two of the candidates running against Jake Auchincloss, who got some of that money, aren't even running anymore. So this is a disaster for the Republican Party in the Northeast, is it not?
So no, because I think that now, by the way, it's Chris Sununu, not John Sununu.
Oh, I'm sorry, Chris Sununu, of course.
That's okay. It's a whole long family there, right? But I mean, look, at the end of the day, Governor Sununu has a young family. Going to Washington, D.C. might not be what he wants to do. Washington, D.C., I think we could all agree it's a mess. If you're a Democrat, you can't agree with the progressive BS that goes on the AOC wing of the party. And so I think that regardless of what party you're in, Washington, D.C. is a mess for both parties. And you have to think twice about whether you want to leave your state that you love and go to D.C. and go into the swamp and deal with everyone. That's number one. Number two, I don't think that
you sound like Joe Biden. Number one, number two. Go ahead. That's good. It's a little bipartisan thing there.
I don't have a teleprompter or notes in front of my face.
Thank you very much. Go ahead. Finish up. I'm sorry.
No Republican uses a teleprompter.
You laid that up for me. You laid that up for me, Jim. And then going back to what Steve was saying, I'm not even sure that the Massachusetts Republican Party apparatus can even host a convention. They have no money. They're begging people for their fees as delegates. I'm having a personal issue with even giving them any money to be a delegate to this convention because I don't want it to go to the Mass Republican Party. And when Chris Doughty is the nominee for the Massachusetts Republican side, not the party, Jim Lyons and the party will do everything they can to destroy that and hand it over to the Democrats.
Okay,
So
I gotta hold you there.
Those Republicans, even Republicans.
Steve, we only have a minute left. In a bipartisan way, and you do have bipartisan moments, I'm serious about this, what would your advice be to Republicans both here and throughout New England, but particularly within Massachusetts, to regain some footing in any races, legislative, statewide races, including governor?
So I think the people in Massachusetts, it would be the same advice I would give Democrats, which is people in Massachusetts want results. They want people with a plan. They want people with a real agenda. And they don't, despite the machinations of some, they don't believe in being hyper-partisan. In the end, that's why 57% of the state is unenrolled.
Yeah.
So come to the table with real ideas and real plans, and I think more folks would vote for you. I mean, look, I thought we did a pretty good job in 2014 campaigning against the governor and the lieutenant governor, but they beat us by 40,000 votes. And I reached out to him when he said he wasn't running for a third term, and I thanked him for his service. Because I know what it takes and what it did for him and his family to serve us, and I want to thank him again here. It is not an easy thing to do, but I agree with him on everything? Absolutely not. But I do appreciate his willingness to serve the Commonwealth, and I wish him well in what he does next.
Steve Kerrigan, Jennifer Nassour, it's great to see you both. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Jim.
Thanks. To continue the theme of the decline of American democracy, almost a year and a half since Joe Biden secured the electoral votes needed to win the presidency, some 2/3 of Republican voters believe the lie that the election was stolen from Donald Trump through voter fraud. And as I mentioned a minute ago, that includes right here in Massachusetts. A new documentary from FRONTLINE, in collaboration with ProPublica, explores the origins of this lie, who's responsible for advancing it, and how it went from the political fringes to the core of a major U.S. party.
Decertify the November 2020 presidential election.
If you don't think that fraud exists in the election and you don't think the election was stolen, you're either stupid or you're just not that bright.
The film is Plot to Overturn the Election. It premieres tonight at 10 here on GBH2. I'm joined by correspondent AC Thompson and director and producer Samuel Black. Samuel, it's good to meet you. AC, good to see you again.
Thanks for having us on.
Gentlemen, can we start by introducing a place and a man that I'm guessing most people had not heard of before this film? AC, starting with you, what's Antrim County and why does it matter?
Antrim County is a county in remote northern Michigan. It's a small, generally rural area. And during the 2020 presidential election, they had a snafu with the balloting. There was a technical error that led to it looking like, for a moment, that Joe Biden had won this predominantly Republican town, predominantly Republican county. And that sort of ended up being a anomaly that election fraud conspiracy theorists fixated on and used to help create this narrative that there had been massive election fraud all over the country. This was what happened in Antrim County was seized on by the president. And Sam, you should explain the details here.
How about it, Samuel?
Yeah, Antrim County really became one of the origin points for the election fraud conspiracy theories. And the myth of the stolen election, which is what our film really covers, one of its roots is Antrim County. In the aftermath of this human error that caused the votes to be switched there, there was a group that arrived on a private jet and really shocked the local folks there that this group had arrived. And they ended up writing a report about what happened there, but their report was riddled with inaccuracies. But this report was shared with the White House. President Trump shared it with his team. And Trump even quoted from the report on January 6th when he spoke to the crowd outside the White House.
Let me just be clear here also, for those who are watching and saying, well, it's understandable, there's a bias on the part of those who determine whether it was cooked or human error. The woman who was the clerk, AC, you interviewed, she acknowledged openly, I think she said, it's on me. I made the mistake that led to this aberration that was ultimately fixed. I'm correct about that, am I not?
Yeah, absolutely. And she's a Republican who voted for Trump. And I think one of the things that she told us, Cheryl Guy is her name, the county clerk, is that she has just been harassed and abused and threatened by her fellow Republicans, which is a story we saw all over the country.
You know, Samuel, back to you. You mentioned that private plane that came in with people who didn't identify themselves, checked through the ballots. We learned later in the film, this is the guy I wanted to ask you about, who most people probably never heard of, that it was funded by a guy by the name of Patrick Byrne. Who's he?
So Patrick Byrne is he's the former CEO of Overstock.com, the online retailer. And he's really one of the biggest figures in this world of people who've spread the myth of the stolen 2020 election. He's one of the biggest funders of the growing movement around this, and he has had a large role in funding audits that have happened in 2021 after Biden's election. Audits, for instance, that we cover in Maricopa County, Arizona, where people have been relitigating the 2020 election. So Byrne is an interesting figure, someone who's really staked his reputation on this issue, but has a background of being a conspiracy theorist in many regards.
And AC, you say to him, if you're right, you save the country. If you're wrong, you destroy the country. And he readily agreed with your summary statement. I want to talk, AC, with you about the spread of this information. Once it came out of Antrim County, it was helped along a lot by a gathering at the plantation of Lynn Wood. Lynn Wood is one of those conspiratorial theory lawyers who helped a Trump attempt unsuccessfully to overturn the results. And here you spoke to ProPublica reporter Doug Bach-Clark. General Flynn was there, mentioned that President Trump spoke on the phone with the lawyers there at least once. Here's part of your conversation with him.
We got a hold of well over 1,000 emails, hundreds of text messages of what was happening on the plantation. This set of papers basically shows a set of emails that show how they crafted one of the lawsuits in order to try and get access to the Dominion machines.
So versions of this end up getting used in lawsuits all over the country.
So the next day on 11...
Has anybody ever seen this?
No.
You know, AC, when you were here a couple of months ago after your terrific film American Insurrection around January 6th and beyond, I asked a question I know is impossible, so I'm going to ask you the same impossible question. Do people at that plantation actually believe this myth, this lie that began percolating out of Antrim County, or did they just seize on it because it was convenient and helpful to their cause?
Yeah, it's still a great question, still impossible to answer, but here's my answer. Overwhelmingly, the people that we met on this reporting journey are true believers. They are absolutely adamant that there was massive fraud in the 2020 election. And so if you're talking about Michael Flynn, if you're talking about Lynn Wood, if you're talking about Sidney Powell, if you're talking about Patrick Byrne, the people that gathered on the plantation and helped disseminate this mythology, the ones that we've encountered and there are people in their circles all tell us they absolutely believe this. Now, the difference is some of the Republican politicians out there, I think, do not believe this. And they're just running on this issue because it is politically expedient. And that's how you cater to the base.
You know, if people also come into this film, Samuel, and say, well, putting aside elected officials or high-ranking Republican infrastructure types, how does the average rank and file believe it? And you make clear in your film, you don't use this term, but I will, the brilliance of Donald Trump, president, but candidate for re-election, essentially grooming the voters, or at least grooming his voters, for the belief that the election is going to be stolen. So when they heard the stories, like out of Antrim County, they were ready for it, no?
That's true. And Donald Trump has been saying that if he didn't win the election since 2016, he's been saying that that would mean that the vote had been rigged. But I think what we found is that it's one thing for the president or former president to say that. It's another thing for the specificity of these conspiracies, theories, is part of what has drawn people in, is part of what has resulted in a situation where now, according to most polls, around 2/3 of Republicans don't believe that Biden was legitimately elected. The specificity of some of these theories, whether it's Dominion machines or other inaccurate claims about the election. That's what the folks we covered lent to this effort. And that's how they've really driven this narrative far beyond what I think Trump could have accomplished alone.
You know, AC, I want to spend the last minute or two talking about the future, and I'll set it up by, you interviewed this Republican Bill Gates, who was a Maricopa County, Arizona supervisor, concerned by his fellow Republicans' embrace of election lies. He and his colleagues commissioned an analysis of the audit, which he opposed. The audit is a sham. He was threatened with arrest, received a voicemail from Rudy Giuliani, the president's lawyer, and here's part of what he had to say.
I think they believe that they can pick off elections officials, Republicans who are concerned about their future political prospects, and work with these folks to overturn an election, which is despicable.
And what happens to this country if moving forward nobody has faith in our election?
That's the beginning of the end of this country, when that happens.
And AC, again, there was a Republican supervisor from Maricopa County. The way they're preparing for 2024 is by trying to knock off people who actually believe in the integrity of the ballot, election officials, secretaries of state, et cetera, and replacing them with the kinds of people you interviewed who buy into the big lie, correct?
The midterms are going to be fascinating because there's a whole slate of big lie candidates running in the Republican primaries. They're all generally endorsed by Trump. And we're going to see if that wing of the party prevails or if the sort of more fact-based wing of the party ends up coming out on top.
And juxtapose on that, before we go, Samuel, is we have Donald Trump giving speech after speech, dropping little tidbit hints that he would be atop the Republican ticket in 2024. So you replace legitimate election officials with those who buy into the big lie, and you put atop the ticket the man who has done more to advance the big lie relentlessly than anybody else. That's the planned scenario, correct?
What's clear is that Donald Trump's PAC, Save America PAC, has amassed a bigger fortune than the Republican and Democratic parties combined at this point going into 2024. And Trump has been strategically endorsing in many races that presidents previously did not focus on. Secretary of State, state legislature, sometimes state attorney general, offices that will be very important if the 2024 election is contested.
AC Thompson, Samuel Black, terrific piece of work, really important. I urge everybody to watch. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Again, Frontline, Plot to Overturn the Election premieres tonight at 10 right here on GBH2 and online at gbh.org/frontline. That's it for tonight. We'll be back tomorrow. Thank you for watching. Please stay safe.
New dawn.
New vibe.
New duo.
I'm looking forward to that, yeah.
Join me, Paris Alston.
And me, Jeremy Siegel.
For GBH's Morning Edition, with the local news and fresh insights you need.
To start your morning and inspire your day.
You gotta live life on the edge a little bit. We're here weekdays from 5 to 10 on 89.7 and gbhnews.org.
All right.
We got it. Let's go. It's a new dawn.
See you in the morning.